Xtalks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This food industry-focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to help keep you up to date.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Xtalks Food Podcast. I'm Sydney Perlmutter, Senior Food Industry Journalist and Webinar Moderator at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm joined by special guest Angie Westbrock. Angie is the CEO of Standard AI, which is at the forefront of applying artificial intelligence and computer vision to physical retail spaces. So, Angie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
All right, so could you start off by elaborating on how Standard AI is sort of facilitating the digital transformation for food retailers specifically?
Sure. So Standard AI started back in 2017, and we were focused on autonomous checkout. We've since pivoted to providing retailers and CPG companies with deep insights and analytics on shopper behavior and what I call operational ground truth. So maybe just taking a step back for a second. So our autonomous tech stack is the foundation for all of our vision products, and it represents 7 years of work. We say like solving the hardest or most complex problem first, because when you think about what it takes to operate an autonomous store, we had to develop advanced AI algorithms that analyze all of this captured data from the cameras in order to figure out precisely where a shopper is, their behavior, their product interactions, and then the store dynamics. And when we started to see that we weren't seeing as wide adoption of autonomous checkout as we wanted to see, or as fast as adoption, we really took a look at this tech stack and said, there's so many awesome applications to this technology well beyond autonomous checkout. So by deploying the same vision platform in a high priority section of the store, we can address really specific challenges like analyzing shopper interactions, monitoring stock levels, and then we can get immediate returns for both the retailers and the brands. But one of the things I compare this to that sort of helps me think through this, digital transformation is that I like to look at e-commerce as almost like a playbook of what to do. So think about e-commerce. It started off with just like simple online stores, right? And then the introduction of tools like Google Analytics came about, and they started realizing, we realized we could track where users were on the website, like where they were clicking, what they were doing. And this ultimately led to a much more curated experience, personalized advertising, new revenue streams. And then that evolved even further when the introduction of advanced analytics and AI and deeper insights came on the scene for websites. So now what I'm excited about is with using computer vision. So by putting cameras in the ceiling and using computer vision and brick and mortar, we basically unlock this same sort of insights that started this whole transformation on the e-commerce sites. So now you can think about what that does. You now have data on what's happening. You can do these data-driven decisions. You can start optimizing shopping. You can think about even like how can brick and mortar stores leverage this real-time shopper data to enhance store experiences, activate personalized promotions, operational efficiency. Really, the options are endless.
Now, how is Standard AI leveraging this real-time shopper data to create personalized in-store promotions and ad? And sort of what impact does this have on customer engagement and sales for food retailers?
Well, we really provide the missing link into retail by offering the real-time shopper data. So this really enhances like traditional loyalty programs. When you think about those, they've relied solely on like the transaction data after the purchase has happened. So imagine leveraging AI to detect when a shopper is browsing or dwelling. So maybe like a couple of examples. Whereas think about like sometimes when you're shopping on a website and the chat pop-up appears, right? if you think about how in a store, AI can distinguish whether you're dwelling, maybe it realizes that you're either really intentionally shopping or you're dwelling and need some help. So now you can deploy customer resources in a very thoughtful and strategic way. Another powerful example might be like cart abandonment. So, you know how if you put stuff in your cart and then you get an email with like a nudge or a pop up to get you to finish that sale. Well, similarly in store, we can detect when a customer puts an item back, right? So it's in what kind of tools or what could you do then to help intervene or enable a transaction at that point. So I think these are just additional examples on how some of these ideas that have already been perfected in e-commerce showcase the potential to just completely revolutionize the in-store experience. And while we don't, standard AI doesn't necessarily create those ads, like we're not doing the ads and promotions, but our platform is what's needed. Like we facilitate the ability to start activating these types of ideas because we're enabling this through the real-time insights of where shoppers are.
So obviously AI offers this new understanding of how people are shopping in physical stores, as you were saying. So can you share some surprising insights or trends that you've discovered about shopper behavior in retail, in food retail specifically?
Yes, sure. So I mean, I want to say I'm so passionate about in-store shopping because this is still really where like 80% of revenue is happening in store. I think there's some misconceptions about, how much, especially for food purchasing, is still happening on delivery. But in store is still where the vast majority of shopping is happening. And 82% of shopping decisions are made in the store, right? So it highlights the importance of that in-store experience. And a couple of studies that we've done, and it's only just scratching the surface. So I'm really excited about what we're going to continue to uncover. But for example, we we did a study where we had 5 different merchandising options that were sort of put out and tested against one another. And now you can test in real time. So it's real time A/B testing to see what shoppers are doing and how they're responding to these changes. So we evaluated 5 different merchandising options and we were able to discover a really effective impulse purchasing area in the store that was previously completely underutilized. So that was one really exciting example. Also, I will say so this is sort of what one of the first times we realized how special our tech was and the applications that went beyond it. So we had autonomous checkout installed in a store and they came to us in preparation for a change they were going to make. And they said, hey, we have this really popular ice cream display, and we're going to move it to a different area of the store in order to facilitate traffic to go back there. And so, knowing they were getting ready to make this change, we said, well, let's run this through our simulation and see if we can predict what would happen. And so, what we found is that through this, we recommended don't make the change. Like we were saying, we think the change is going to result in lower sales. And what we did is predict certain metrics like dwell time, interactions, and what was going to happen with traffic flow. When they actually made the move, we had predicted up like with 90% accuracy what was going to happen. And it did result in every one of those metrics going down. And so this was a great test for us to say there's a lot of accuracy in what we're doing does transcend to these types of predictions on what's going to happen with merchandising changes in this store, so that now you can sort of get an idea of what's going to happen before you actually have to make that physical change.
So what happens when consumers encounter out of stock items in food retail stores, and how does AI help predict and manage these situations, and what alternative behaviors do customers exhibit?
This is so interesting. So I think out of stocks is one of those things where notoriously we know they have impact on the overall store and sales, but it's been very difficult to quantify that, right? So historically, when they're out of stock, you might not know, so you can't really take it into consideration. So in a recent study that we did for a CPG company, and this was a company that has very high brand loyalty. So kind of keeping that in mind, they were saying, well, how impactful are out of stocks in the purchasing patterns of our shoppers? So we were able to actually study that. And we found that 50% of the time when there was an out of stock that happened, that customer was going to buy another product from that same brand, right? And that was that very strong brand loyalty that we were talking about. However, 25% of the time, they left without even making a purchase. So this is presumably they're going to another retailer to buy that same product, right? So this is lost revenue for that retailer. And then 20% of the time, maybe they just went outside the category, but 5% of the time they went to a competitor. And so this data is really invaluable, and you would not be able to see that on transaction logs. And the other thing that I think is really important about this is that in our, a lot of companies, CPG companies, they have inventory algorithms that are going to automatically reorder, right? But you wouldn't actually know that those substituted items were a substitution. So you would reorder the wrong items, right? And it just like perpetuates mismanagement of inventory. Um, Another really interesting thing that we were able to correlate with this study, because on-shelf availability is sort of the inverse of out of stocks, right? So on-shelf availability is something that I think we're starting to pay more attention to. And what does that mean for brand presence? What does that mean for sales, even if it's not just out of stock? So we were able to correlate that for every 10% decrease in shelf availability, it resulted in a 5% decrease in brand sales, even if other brand items were available. So you can see where starting to get this, like I keep calling it ground truth integration, that's the operator in me, what's actually happening in the store, and being able to take that information to interpret what's happening with your sales can completely, change the way you're looking at ordering, inventory management, all of those things. And also just ensuring that you have the right product available for the customer when they want it.
So, how is AI technology enhancing loss prevention strategies in food retail, and what are some success stories or measurable impacts that you've seen so far?
I mean, really, this is about AI harnessing the power of data, right? So I think that there are some companies out there that are doing like real time alerts when theft is happening. And that's, one option. And I think it can be really effective. But what we're hearing from retailers is many of them are moving away from that due to safety concerns. So they would instead rather focus on learnings, trends, repeat issues that are happening. And so when you think about what's really available on the market right now, is that most of the time theft trends are kind of discovered after a period of time, right? Like after they've already been happening, and this is making retailers really vulnerable. So with computer vision, we can really detect every time a shopper picks something up, puts it, I mean, think about this with autonomous checkout, right? So in order to facilitate an autonomous checkout store, you had to know every item that that shopper was picking up and then charge them for it when they walked out the door. So doing that in service of loss prevention is allowing you to virtually see every single theft incident that's happening. And then not only, I mean, we have implemented this in places where we've provided the curated video just to make it easier for loss prevention teams to, easier and faster to go through security footage. But even more than that, what I think is really, once again, this is sort of like the data nerd in me, but the data is what reveals the theft patterns. So you can start to see like time of day, store areas that are maybe more vulnerable than others. You can start to maybe detect shopper paths that are more likely to result in a theft incident. And that's allowing retailers to, once again, just make data-driven decisions on preventative measures. And then also, as they implement them, assess their effectiveness in real time. So one example, we're still early on implementing this technology, but we did install it in a store recently, and we detected the first theft incident within 24 hours. We're able to provide that video, and the retailer was able to learn, some insights about how theft was happening and put some preventative measures in place. So I think those are just great examples of it goes from being this guess to having real data backing up the types of decisions that you're making.
Now, can you discuss how standard AI's tech is optimizing the supply chain for food retailers? So, from forecasting demand to managing inventory?
Yeah, I mean, this is the topic that's near and dear to my heart coming from my CPG days back when I was on the manufacturing side. But it comes back to having that real time data on shopper behavior and shelf inventory. So that allows us to more accurately forecast demand and minimize out of stock situations. And that, I kind of touched on that a little bit before, but something also that I think is really important is especially around new product launches, right? So, you have these big iconic brands with lots of historical data that have, pretty predictable buying patterns. But when you introduce new products into the mix, like this is where it's very, very difficult to predict how a customer is going to respond to that new product. And that's where you'll see these, big out of stock situations or oversupply in that matter. And so by getting real time feedback, not just on, once again, the transactions, but how customers are interacting with that product in the store, right? Are they even seeing it? One of the things that I'm excited that we introduce is the idea of impressions. So, when you're introducing digital content, right, you're trying to see not just how many impressions you had, but then how many interactions that you had. So we can do that actually at a shelf level. And now when you introduce a new product, you can think about, well, am I getting impressions and they're not converting? Or am I just not even getting impressions? And maybe I need to think more about my product placement, where it is in the store, or my packaging. And so that level of information is going to be able to help you with much more certainty predict what's happening. And that's going to allow forecasting inventory management to be, much more data driven than it is now.
So, with the increasing use of AI and data collection, how does standard AI ensure consumer privacy and comply with data protection regulations in the food retail sector?
I love this question. It's an important one. Privacy is something that's been the pillar of what we've been building on from the beginning. So, Standard AI does not use any facial recognition software or collect any personal identifiable information. So, we accomplish what we're doing through strategic, methodical camera placement. A lot of times it's already in use today through security cameras. So we'll supplement the security cameras that are in the ceiling. But then we deploy our advanced algorithms, and that is what's allowing us to determine how customers are interacting with the shelf. So the way that I describe this to people is we will know that a shopper is walking through the store and interacting with the shelf, but we won't know that Angie is, right? So we don't personally identify, it's completely anonymous who the shopper is. And so we've been built privacy first, and we don't actually, I mean, this is kind of a shift in mindset. We don't actually believe that you need to know demographics about the customer to generate meaningful analytics. So we don't profile the customer, we don't look at age, gender, and ethnicity to recommend purchases. And a lot of times we have found that through just tracking how the shopper is moving in the store, that shopper intent signal is even stronger than demographics.
That's interesting. Quick follow up with that. Can it decipher, though, between like adult and child?
Yeah.
Okay,
We
yeah.
can tell adult. I mean, generally speaking, of course, my son who's 12 and is looking at me in the eyes, probably not necessarily, but certainly through the way that they're shopping,
Mm.
and then we can also tell like group shopping, who's together, and how they're like sharing a cart, things like that. So it's really about their movement and how they're interacting with the products on the shelf that's helping us distinguish between shoppers and one another.
Gotcha. Okay, so how can food retailers integrate standard AI's tech in with their existing systems, and what are some of the challenges and benefits of doing that?
So we have deep experience in software integrations into the retail tech stack, including the POS systems, inventory, and accounting. And one particular challenge that retailers face with new technology partners of all sorts, including a bunch of AI startups that have come on the market, is integrations. And so every new provider requiring integration work is taxing for the retailer who needs to supply the time and the expertise to support the effort. So, in addition to that, with every new tech provider that's introduced into their network, there's going to be inherent risk in the increased complexity and the exposure of overall tech stack. So it's exciting to be able to have GPU enabled smart devices in your stores until you realize the complexity of software updates, security patches, and other vulnerabilities beyond just the cost of hardware. So this is where we see ourselves as, a one strong tech partner to build with. We have capabilities, once again, ranging from operational efficiencies all the way through merchandising. And that's allowing you to partner with one technology partner, simplify the tech stack, and help this, because it can become really quite complex for the retailer to be interacting with so many different tech providers. And we think, rather than choosing point solutions, it's better to partner with someone like us, also that's been around for many years, to to have that partner to sort of guide you through that transformation.
So, drawing from your experience, like you were saying in CPG manufacturing, how do you see AI changing the landscape for food manufacturers specifically?
I mean, yeah. So this is what I'm really excited about. I think a lot of times we're heavily focused on the retailer, and that's super important and where all of this sort of comes to life. But I think the CPG manufacturers definitely have a huge part in this. And I think it's really a transformative force, reshaping the way they look at insights into the entire supply chain. So where traditionally, manufacturers and retailers have operated in somewhat separate realms, and I say that just because the places where they can sort of call the source of truth are like the moment of delivery, right? So we have this moment where products are delivered to the store, and then we have the sales logs. And those are sort of the two main pieces of data or sources of truth that have been available. But what we do is sort of bridge that gap by offering all of this real-time data and analytics in between. And so what I think we're doing is connecting those dots between the manufacturer and the retailer to provide a comprehensive view of the movement. And then this synergy allows both parties to address common problems. And that's what I think it's really about, is like getting data to the right folks who can solve the problems that are very, very complex, right? So for example, we can help manufacturers and retailers understand the impact of out of stock situations. And then together they can work on strategies, because there's never, when you get to the point where there's an out of stock, it's not typically like one problem, right? It's like a bunch of things that had to happen. And being able to bring both parties to the table and work together to create, important solutions is going to benefit the entire industry and help fill those gaps. So I'm really excited about how this just opens up a new data set to both the retailer and the manufacturer to participate in problem solving.
Now, reflecting on your role at Lyft during the COVID-19 task force, what lessons from the pandemic are applicable to the food retail industry, particularly in terms of operational resilience and adaptability?
I know. Oh, that was a crazy time, wasn't it? It's like, it's hard to believe that that's been 4 years ago now, but it doesn't seem like it. And what I would say is, reflecting on my time as at Lyft as head of the COVID task force, I just have immense respect for the food retail industry's resilience. I mean, during the pandemic, I feel like this sector in particular was just put to the ultimate test, from maintaining factory operations with essential workers, um, all the like new COVID protocols that had to go in place at the time, and then rapid shifts in consumer behaviors. So all this, I mean, just complete overnight change in consumer behaviors, labor challenges, supply chain challenges. I mean, so what I would say is like the food industry has shown its ability to adapt, and their ability to continue to serve communities during this time was absolutely remarkable. So what I would say is like this also revealed to me, like, and I personally felt this as well, but the toll that being in sort of constant crisis management can take on innovation, right? So many industries, especially food and retail, were forced to cut back on discretionary spending. We saw this. And innovation is usually one of the first ones to take the biggest or hardest hits. And then, one of the things that I realized is that when you're working in these environments, somehow finding a way to maintain focus on innovation is really important to staying relevant and meeting consumer expectations. So, as we move forward, it's vital that the food retail industry is starting to reimagine what's happening in brick and mortar experience and investing in innovation solutions there. And then that will mean that we continue to evolve and meet the changing needs of the customer, keeping that shopping experience in store engaging and relevant.
And my last question for you. So, how can AI contribute to more sustainable practices in food retail? And what initiatives is your company involved in to support sustainability goals within the industry?
Yeah, so with my operational background, I've always been super passionate about using data to solve real problems. Kind of, maybe I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it's like, it's so important. So, um, time and time and again, in my experience being, leading large teams, operations, all of the complexities of that, one of the biggest challenges is getting the data and learning about what's happening. And so one of the amazing things about computer vision is our ability to, apply this kind of information on inventory management to fresh food areas as well. So think about like some other point solutions like robots or shelf cameras. They are missing big areas of the store like produce and some of those like meat display cases where fresh food and waste is happening. And so with vision technology, we're not limited by how you're merchandising that product or whether, where it is in the store. And I think a great example of this is one of the first products that we launched post our pivot was called Fresh Food Tracker. We were working with a customer that said like, hey, I'm really struggling. I have a fresh food area of the store that gets replenished, and they were just struggling getting the order right. And so we were able to implement, using just a couple of cameras, a solution that notified them not just when an out of stock occurred, but when there was low inventory, so that they could understand when they needed to make more, or also when there was too much inventory and we were starting to see sales close down. And so that enabled we were able to increase sales pretty significantly during that time and also reduce waste at the same time, because the level of precision that you're able to make those decisions on is, in real time, helping the employees the employees in retail are just, they're responsible for so many things. They have so many things going on. And so anytime that we can just make that situation easier for them, clear out some noise and make it easier on when they need to produce and replenish those fresh food sales, it's going to help to optimize that and minimize waste. So that's one example. And I think that can be applied on a much bigger level across all areas of the store to just optimize that supply chain and ultimately reduce waste across food and in general.
All right, well, that's all the questions I have. But Angie, thank you so much for joining. This was a great conversation and I learned a lot.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Food Podcast. If you like today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Xtalks Food Industry Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find Xtalks on social media. Email podcast@xtalks.com or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.